straight ahead on Law&Crime Daily.
The biggest moment, aside from the actual sentence being pronounced, was when Ghislaine Maxwell made a statement. And she made one heck of a statement.
A sentence is handed down for convicted sex trafficker Ghislaine Maxwell. And a Missouri mother stands trial for the murder of her daughter.
I believe her words were, "What am I supposed to do when my daughter throws herself in a fire?"
Plus,
she will tell you about what was going on in that house. How Christian wasn't being fed. He wasn't being bathed. He wasn't being cared for.
Dejuan Ferguson did not kill his son.
Hear opening statements from both sides as Dejuan Ferguson is tried for murder. And later, Scott Peterson is due back in court. We look ahead to the convicted killer's coming court date. Law&Crime Daily covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law&Crime Daily. I'm your host, Brian Buckmire. Months after she's convicted of federal sex trafficking crimes, Ghislaine Maxwell is sentenced to 20 years in prison. Law&Crime Network covered Maxwell's federal trial closely as the companion of Jeffrey Epstein was convicted late last year. Federal prosecutors say Maxwell helped Epstein groom girls as young as 14 years old for sexual abuse and sometimes participated in the abuse. Epstein was arrested on federal charges of sex trafficking in 2019, but was later found dead by suicide in his jail cell. Law&Crime Network's Michael Bryant was in the courtroom Tuesday as the sentence was handed down.
There's a lot of buildup. You know, it was 2.5 hours from the time the hearing began. And so a lot of anticipation, but the biggest moment, aside from the actual sentence being pronounced, was when Ghislaine Maxwell made a statement. And she made one heck of a statement. If you didn't know better, you would think she was addressing, you know, some of the highfalutin society dinner club. She acknowledged all of the victims who gave very heartbreaking statements as well. She acknowledged that Epstein is an animal and a monster, and he manipulated people. Bottom line is, she came off as, "Hey, I'm just one of you. I'm just one of the victims here." And there was no real remorse. There was acknowledgement of all the things that these folks went through. No real responsibility. And that's key to the sentence that was imposed, because the judge said just before imposing that sentence, "I saw no responsibility being taken by this defendant." And the guidelines would have given her somewhere between 18 and 19 years, give or take. So there was an upward departure of sorts by the judge herself. And I really think she tied it to the fact that this eloquent statement that was made did not involve any acceptance of responsibility for what these victims had gone through.
Thanks, Michael. Maxwell was also sentenced to 5 years supervised release and faces a $750,000 fine. She will be sent to a federal prison in Connecticut. Joining us today is co-host Terri Austin and criminal defense attorney Adam Konta. Adam, was the defense's request for jail time a reasonable one? Should they or could they have even done something better?
I don't think the request for 4.25 to 5.25 years was reasonable. I mean, when you look at what her conduct is, it's really, really egregious. And the problem is she stepped back to the kind of the defense her and her attorney both did of, "Listen, we all know it should be Jeffrey Epstein standing here right now." That's not a good look in front of the judge. Just take Epstein out of it. This isn't about his conduct. This was specifically about your conduct. You helped traffic in minors for sexual contact with adults. End of story. Stop. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. 4.25 to 5.25 was not reasonable. 30 years also not reasonable. I think the judge really kind of sent a message saying, "Hey, 15 to 19 is the range. I'm going to go a little above that." And I think the only reason she went above that is because of her refusal to take responsibility and trying to pass it along to Epstein.
Yeah, maybe she didn't pass the buck and had a bit of a different statement. Could have gone a little lower there, but that's for another time to think about. Terri, hearing from both sides, especially the victim impact statements, did the judge come to the right decision in terms of that number of 20 years?
The judge definitely came to the right decision here. Look, she faced up to 55 years, and the prosecution asked basically for the max, between 30 and 55, and then Maxwell's attorney asked for between 4 and 5, in which I agree with Adam 100%. That's way too low to ask for something like that. This was a serious crime. The judge said it was a serious crime. She listened to those victim impact statements. She didn't appreciate the fact that Maxwell didn't take responsibility. And she said 20 years is sufficient and no graver than necessary. Good decision.
Yeah, especially when you think about it, I'm thinking, Adam, of the who does 4 to 5 years in state prison here in New York. This is way different. I can't imagine that number was requested, but that's how they did it. Thank you. Well, just one day after Maxwell's sentence is handed down, disgraced singer R. Kelly is expected to be sentenced on Wednesday in federal court. Law&Crime Network covered Kelly's case last September when he was convicted on all 9 federal charges against him, including racketeering and sex trafficking. The R&B singer could now face life behind bars for his role in a scheme to recruit women and underage children for sex. Federal prosecutors requested a sentence that is, quote, in excess of 25 years. Kelly's attorneys have asked for a shorter sentence of less than 14 years. Several survivors are expected to speak at Wednesday's sentencing, and Kelly himself may also make his first public statement since he declined to take the stand in the 6-week trial. Law&Crime Network will be at the federal courthouse for Wednesday's sentencing. Stay with us for the latest developments in the case. Also in celebrity news, Britney Spears' ex-husband is ordered to trial on felony charges of stalking the pop star. This week, a California judge ruled there is enough evidence for 40-year-old Jason Allen Alexander to head to trial on charges of stalking, trespassing, vandalism, and battery. Back in 2004, Spears married Alexander, her childhood friend, in Las Vegas. The marriage lasted for less than 3 days and ended in annulment. Earlier this month, Spears tied the knot for a 3rd time to longtime boyfriend Sam Asghari at their California home. Ahead of the ceremony, Alexander showed up to the home uninvited and live-streamed the incident on Instagram. Spears' security guard says Alexander broke into the home and made it into Spears' bedroom. Alexander has pled not guilty to all charges. Still ahead on Law&Crime Daily, opening statements are presented in Missouri, where a father stands trial for the murder of his son. But first, a mother stands trial for the murder of her teenage daughter. How first responders say she reacted when her daughter's remains were discovered. Welcome back. The first witnesses are called in Missouri as a woman stands trial for the murder of her teenage daughter. Prosecutors say Rebecca Rude murdered her 16-year-old daughter, Savannah Leckie, back in 2017. Savannah had special needs and had previously been adopted. Though Rude's biological daughter, Savannah, was adopted by another couple as a baby. When she began struggling with behavioral problems as a teen, Savannah moved back in with her biological mother, Rude, and her boyfriend, Robert Pete. 11 months later, Rude reported her daughter missing. Prosecutors say Rude abused Savannah and that she and Pete eventually killed her and burned her body in June of 2017. Investigators searched their Ozark County farm and found bone fragments and teeth in a burn pile. On Monday, Pete's father and an area fire chief took the stand. He described Rude's response when Savannah's burned remains were discovered.
You said you're out there maybe twice?
I was out there the first day when she was reported missing. I don't recall if I went back the second day or not.
Okay. During the time you're out there searching with those other folks, did the defendant say anything about Savannah's body being burned on top of the hill?
No.
At some other time after Savannah's remains were found burned on top of the hill, did you hear the defendant say anything about Savannah and what happened to her that day?
I believe her words were, "What am I supposed to do when my daughter throws herself in a fire?"
All right, so Terri, of course, from the defense and the prosecution, there are different versions of how the body was burned. How do you think that will affect the jury's deliberations?
You know, it's interesting. The defense said during opening that Rude was going to say that this was something that happened and then she burned the body, that she was going to actually admit to burning the body. So now we have evidence that at one point she said that she might have thrown herself into the fire. First of all, that's not credible. And usually you'll have a jury who's going to be looking at this evidence. This is a case where we have the judge who's going to have to determine what is true, what actually happened. Obviously, I think the judge is going to say Savannah did not throw herself into the fire. And I think the judge is going to have to determine whether or not Rude was lying about how the body got into that fire.
All right, so Adam, those are the different stories. Let's focus on the one that we've got right here. What are your thoughts on Ruth's statement to the firefighter when first confronted about her daughter's death? How bad are those statements against her?
Well, this is interesting because I think the most important thing to remember here is that this is a bench trial. So you can spin a lot of things to a jury that, hey, this is, when I said this, it really was in this context and it's being misinterpreted, it's being misconstrued. Really, this is what I meant. And it has an effect. You can connect with jurors a lot easier than a judge a lot of times. So what they're going to have to do is take this statement, which seems patently untrue on its face, especially with hydrocodone in her system, and they're going to have to explain it away. So to do that with a judge versus a jury, they're going to have to be very careful and very smart about how and what they say to try to get rid of it.
Which begs the question, should this have been a jury trial? But that will be a question for another day. And in a monumental Supreme Court ruling, justices Monday decided that a former high school football coach in Washington had a right to pray on the field after his games. Coach Joseph Kennedy was fired by his Washington school district after starting a practice of praying on the 50-yard line at the end of football games. Kennedy said the district violated his religious freedom when they told him he couldn't pray publicly on the field and asked him to find a private spot. The school argued it didn't want Kennedy's actions to appear that the school was endorsing a religious point of view. But the coach said he was acting on his own behalf and expressing his own religious views. In a 6-3 ruling, justices said he was within his First Amendment rights, which protects expression like Kennedy's. Justices who voted down the ruling argued that school officials leading prayer was constitutionally impermissible and that the ruling did a disservice to the nation's commitment to the separation of church and state. Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, for the first time in years, video cameras will be allowed inside a Scott Peterson hearing. Plus, we head to Missouri, where opening statements are presented in the trial of Dejuan Ferguson. Welcome back. Opening statements are presented in the trial of Missouri versus Dejuan Ferguson, a man who stands trial for the murder of his son, a boy with special needs who was last seen nearly 2 decades ago. Back in 2003, Christian Ferguson was just 9 years old when he went missing while in his father's care. Ferguson and Christian's mother, Theda, were in the middle of a custody dispute over the boy and his sibling. Christian had a rare disorder which prevented his body from processing protein, a condition which required constant medical attention and made it impossible for him to walk or even talk. Investigators say Ferguson failed to provide his son with proper medication for more than 2 years. Then, in the early morning hours of June 11, 2003, Ferguson left his home with Christian and stopped to use a payphone. He later called 911 to report someone had carjacked his running SUV with Christian inside. The vehicle was found just 2 hours later, about 5 miles away. Christian's body was never found. He is now presumed to be dead. In opening statements Monday, prosecutors told jurors what they will hear from several of Christian's family members, including his sister, who was just 8 years old at the time of his disappearance.
You will hear from Lynn Ferguson, Christian's sister. She will tell you about what was going on in that house, how Christian wasn't being fed, he wasn't being bathed, he wasn't being cared for. On the day of June 10th, Lynn notices that Christian's feeding tube is not in his stomach. Lynn was in her room, she shared with Christian. Christian is moaning loudly. She remembers pretending to be asleep when the defendant walks into that bedroom, picks up Christian, and takes Christian into the TV room. She hears Christian moaning. She hears what she describes as a struggle, but she doesn't see it, but she hears it. And then she hears the moaning stop. And then she sees Dejuan Ferguson carry a quiet Christian and place him back in bed. And then a short while later, he comes back in the room again, wraps him entirely in a blanket, and carries him out of the room. Lynn Ferguson never saw her brother again after that.
Dejuan's defense attorneys argued to the jury in their opening statement what they say happened to their client's son.
Dejuan Ferguson did not kill his son. In the early morning of June 11th of 2003, Dejuan noticed that Christian was sick. So when Christian got sick, Dejuan did what he normally did, which was to take Christian to the hospital. So he wrapped Christian up in a blanket because he was just in a t-shirt and a diaper at the time. On the way to the hospital, Dejuan realized he should have called ahead. When he realized his phone was out of minutes, that's when he stopped at the payphone. While at the payphone, Dejuan left his car running, and he realized his car was being stolen as it sped away. Dejuan immediately got off the phone with the hospital and called 911 to report the car stolen, and that his disabled son was inside of that vehicle.
Terri, the prosecution said they filed this case after a fresh set of eyes reviewed it. Inconsistent stories from Ferguson and the fact that he stopped cooperating. Did they do enough to start proving their case in this opening, though?
Absolutely not. They should have done far more in the beginning. Listen, the prosecution has waited all these years, 19 years. 2003 was a long time ago. And granted, there's no body here. It's hard to prove a case if you don't have a body. But this was a 9-year-old boy. It's not like he went away on his own. And that story that someone stole the car is bogus. Why do you have to stop at a payphone when you're going to the hospital? Just go to the hospital if that is what you are really doing. So I think they should have done the investigation back then. They should have done more, brought the charges. They would have had the witnesses. And there's just no reason for them to have waited all this time. This is the person closest to the child. He should have been brought to charges long before this.
Yeah, Adam, maybe this was child neglect and not an intentional murder. Maybe someone really did kidnap Christian. With different possible defenses, what do you think the defense's opening suggests we will hear throughout this trial?
I think it suggests that you're going to hear a variety of options that they may just try to decide what sticks to the wall. I mean, what they should be doing is, listen, you see this guy, Dejuan, you might not like him. He might not be a good dad. Has nothing to do with whether or not he murdered his son. There is absolutely no evidence that he murdered him. They can't prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. Their burden to prove it. Hold them to it. And if you have even one single doubt when this case is over, which you will have many, your duty by law is you must acquit him, even if you don't like him.
Yeah, I mean, go with the bad dad argument. He's a bad dad, but not a murderer. We all can't be Adam Konta's amazing fathers. So let's see how this defense continues. When we come back, Scott Peterson is headed back to the courtroom, but not as soon as planned. What's causing a delay as the convicted killer works towards a new trial? Welcome back. Closing arguments have been delayed as convicted killer Scott Peterson's team works to overturn his conviction. The hearing, which was set for Wednesday, is being pushed to a later date. Peterson's attorneys argue he deserves a new trial based on jury misconduct. This stems from Juror 7 in Peterson's 2004 trial. Defense attorneys say Rochelle Neese, dubbed Strawberry Shortcake by the media, did not disclose a past abusive relationship while pregnant when answering a jury questionnaire. In a series of evidentiary hearings earlier this year, Neese was granted immunity in exchange for testimony. Nearly 20 years ago, Neese was part of the jury that convicted Peterson in the death of his 27-year-old wife, Lacey, and their unborn son, Connor. Peterson was originally sentenced to death in the case, but was later resentenced to life in prison. A hearing Wednesday is delayed until August after Peterson's attorneys tested positive for COVID-19. Peterson is also on a loose quarantine after being exposed to COVID himself at San Quentin. The closing arguments are now set for August 11th. Adam, we know there's a delay, but with this decision for a new trial or the coming decision, what do you think the strongest arguments are for the defense, and do you think they'll win with those?
Well, I think they have a very strong defense to get a new trial. Jury misconduct is really, really serious. And if it's tainted from the beginning, then that doesn't dissipate throughout the course of the trial. It only grows stronger. So if you're building a house and your foundation is bad, the house can be beautiful. The prosecution put together a beautiful trial to convict him, but the foundation was bad because this juror made it so. And so, they're going to rely on that. I think they're going to get a new trial. When they go back to trial, I think we're going to spend all this taxpayer money to get right back where we are. But he deserves to get there the right way.
Yes, the way the system is meant to be done, it's supposed to be a fair and impartial trial for everyone, regardless of guilt or innocence. Well, Terri, same question for you, but on the prosecution side, do you think the decision to allow, same question, what are the strong arguments, but also I want to add this other one, what do you think of the decision to allow cameras in the court?
Well, as far as the strongest argument for the prosecution is concerned, they've got a difficult battle, as Adam mentioned. When you have jury misconduct, and in fact, that conduct might have affected the deliberations, then I do believe there are great grounds to have that conviction overturned. And they have an interview of this juror saying, yes, I told the jury that, they should look at these victims because I was a victim myself, and you should believe what these victims were saying. So I definitely think there's a good chance that it's going to be overturned. I think the prosecution is going to have to argue that it didn't affect the deliberations, but it's going to be difficult to do that. And I do think we should have cameras in that courtroom. This is a case where it has so many people looking at it, and we need to see what's going on.
Well, sounds right. Well, thank you for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.